Welcome to Gospel Tangents. I'm Greg Prince.
Hi, I'm Rick Bennett, and welcome to Gospel Tangents. In our next conversation with Dr. Greg Prince, we're going to talk about legal, science, and social issues with regards to gay rights and gay biology. So it's going to be a very interesting conversation. You're not going to want to miss it. Check it out. Hey, one more thing. I'm going to be in the Kansas City / Independence, Missouri area the second and third week of June. So if you're going to be in that area, I'd love to get together. Just send me an email to gospeltangents@gmail.com, and I'd love to talk to you. Now back to our conversation.
You know, I know in our last interview, one of the things that the people that disagreed with you the most, I guess we'll put it that way. Previously, we had talked, and I know it came up again last night, where you had said that it was a straw man where people think that the government will now force gay marriages.
Yeah.
And you'd given an example, has a rabbi ever been forced to marry a Jew and a Gentile and things like that. So I know there are still some people, I know if you look in my comments, I have a few people from lawyers that say that your argument is a straw man.
I base my argument on two bits of data.
Okay.
One is that when the Hawaii decision was handed down that invalidated the law, the Hawaii Supreme Court made it explicit that under no circumstances would the LDS Church or any church be required by the state to perform any kind of marriage. That the authority to perform marriages resided in the state. It could be given to churches and give them the privilege of performing marriages that would be legal, but there was no obligation that extended with that privilege. In other words, the state could not say, here's how you have to do it, here's who you have to perform ceremonies for. It was made explicit in that. The other data point is lengthy conversations with Bill Eskridge, who is a professor of law at Yale, is considered the top legal expert in the country on LGBTQ law. And he said, and in fact wrote an op-ed for the Salt Lake Tribune to this effect, it isn't going to happen. The Constitution is absolutely clear that by the separation of church and state, the state cannot dictate to any church what marriages they need to perform. It can say you can't perform certain types. For instance, it would frown on churches trying to conduct plural marriages because there's a national law against it. But it cannot intervene and say you must perform this kind of marriage or we will take away your tax exemption. It's just not there.
Okay. Well, let me ask you about this. Just recently we've had the change in LDS weddings, which I think has been a welcome change for a lot of people. My question is, in fact, I think this came up last night as well, how much of that was a social issue and how much did it have to do with gay marriage, this separation of sealing from an actual marriage?
It's a good question, and I don't have any information that allows me to answer it. What it did was to put countries around the world on essentially the same footing. That most countries have not allowed LDS temple weddings to be the wedding of record. They hold that that authority resides only with the state. And no religious institution is granted that authority. So in most countries, it's been the law all the way along that if an LDS couple want to get married in the temple, they go to the clerk first, they have the legally authorized wedding, and then they go to the temple for what then becomes the temple sealing. So this puts the U.S. now on the same footing as the other countries. It also puts the U.S. back to where it was until the late 1960s. At that point, you could get married anywhere and the same day or the next day or the next week go to the temple and have a sealing and everything was fine. But somebody decided in the late 60s that they didn't want to do that anymore. That somehow the civil marriage degraded the value of the temple. And so they said, no, if you want a temple marriage, you need to do that without a civil one. And if you get a civil one first, we're going to make you wait a year until you can get a temple sealing.
Yeah. So for those maybe conservative legal scholars, let's say, that think that there was a problem with the government forcing, say, a gay wedding in a temple, do you think that this policy will assuage those fears because it has now separated the two?
It could have been a factor in their thinking, and certainly if that were ever to be a case, it gives them an escape. But I'm not an attorney. I'm not an authority on legal issues. Okay. I speak as one who has spoken to people who are authorities, particularly Bill. And if those attorneys who disagree want to get into a dialogue, they should get into a dialogue with him and not me.
All right. Well,
if they want to talk science, I can talk then.
Well, that's something that we haven't talked about. That. Let's talk a little bit about the science, because I do know that we've changed. I know President Kimball had a big book, Miracle of Forgiveness, and I believe that's a chapter in your book?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that and how the church has changed?
Well, the church, along with really American society, for decades, when they first started to view homosexuality as different and a threat and evil and even criminal, the basis of that was that this is a chosen behavior that goes contrary to society. So it was a behavioral paradigm. Not that you're born this way. And we've had a lot of people in society and a lot of men in church leadership who have come right out over the years and said, the whole idea that you could be born this way is heresy. God would never do that. And biology had not even spoken on the issue yet because it didn't have the tools. Decades ago, researchers started to look at twins to see if that gave them clues as to the cause of homosexuality. If it were strictly genetic, then identical twins would always be the same. If one were gay, the other would be gay. If one were straight, the other would be gay. Or the other would do straight. Fraternal twins, because they don't share the same genetic makeup, would be expected to be different, like maybe not concordant at all. And it turned out that it was a mixture of the two. That with identical twins, the concordance would be in the neighborhood of 50 to 60%. If one twin is gay, then it would be likely that the other also would be gay, but not essential. Whereas with the fraternal twins, it was maybe around 20%. So what that really said, although we didn't realize the ramifications of it at that time, was genetics is part of it, but there's something else that's part of it, and we didn't know what to call that yet. Eventually, that came to be known as epigenetics, which are factors that work on how the genes function, but they're not the genes themselves. The other thing that predated molecular biology was the birth order effect, and it only functions in males. When a woman has a male child, there is whatever the percent is chance that that boy will be gay. It may be 5%, maybe 10%, we really don't know, but it's somewhere in that neighborhood. For the next son, the probability of that son being gay goes up 33% from his older sibling. Female births have nothing to do with this. It doesn't affect females, and they don't affect the male birth order effect. But if you have multiple male births, it's additive. So with each subsequent birth, the probability of that boy being gay is 33% higher than with his older sibling. And that was known for a long time. With the advent of molecular biology and with sophisticated studies now about all of the factors that can influence how genes express themselves, we have seen much more of an effect of epigenetics and how it is the force that results in sexual preference and gender identity. Now, those two things, sexual preference being who do I go to bed with, gender identity being who do I go to bed as. Everybody has both of those. The majority would be heterosexual in their sexual preference and cisgender, meaning that their identity matches their anatomy. Well, put those on a grid and you can see that you got multiple possibilities, particularly when you start to realize that there are more than one or two options on either axis there. So it becomes very complicated. We haven't even defined yet all of the different flavors of what now more and more is becoming known as non-heterosexuality, because homosexuality doesn't describe everything that's not heterosexual. There are things in between, like bisexual and asexual and intersex, where somebody actually has biological components of both sexes. So it's very complicated. There will be no one-size-fits-all to explain how somebody develops in this direction versus that direction, but it is becoming clearer with time that this is biology. It's an imprint deep within the fetal brain that is present at birth, and it's permanent and you can't change it. So gradually, as science has spoken louder and louder, you have the fading of the behavioral paradigm and replacement by the biological paradigm. That's a difficult transition for a lot of people to make. It's a difficult transition for a lot of institutions to make. And even though the LDS Church is partially there in that it said in its website, mormonsandgays.org, it's not a choice, they're hedging their bets because essentially they're saying who you are, even though you didn't choose to be that, you're not allowed to be. You can't act out what you are biologically or we will punish you. That's where we are right now, and I don't think that's a sustainable policy. But that transition from the behavioral paradigm to the biological paradigm is a work in progress, and it'll be a slow work. But science, I can assure you, will speak more and more clearly on this. The problem is there are so many different flavors out there. Each one is likely to have a different biological process underpinning it. And so defining each one of those is going to take a long time.
Mm-hmm. Well, interesting. All right, well, last question I have for you that I just wanted to address here. I know last night, I believe you said that as a result of the November 2015 policy, how many people, do you have any sense for how many people left the church?
I have heard, I think from solid authority, that in the year following the announcement of the policy, over 60,000 people
in 1 year
resigned their church membership formally. And you would have to figure that more people would be likely just to walk away than to go through the process of writing the letter to have their name removed. So do the arithmetic there. It may be into the hundreds of thousands. I don't know. I don't know if the church knows, because for those who just disappear, how do you know what the reason was? Mm-hmm. If they just quietly walk away.
I guess that's Jana Reese, right?
If you have enough people quietly walking away, it's not quiet anymore. It's thundering. Mm-hmm. And I've just got to think that that weighed into their decision to eliminate that policy. Otherwise, why would they reverse ground? Especially when they called it revelation. That's a tough corner to get out of, but they got out of it.
Do you have a sense, is that why they reversed the policy?
I don't know.
Okay. Are we going to get those people back?
I doubt it. Because those who have left that I've spoken to or that I've heard about generally were angry when they left. And if they're angry when they leave, you're not likely to get them back. That's the very sad part, and that's why just reversing the policy didn't get us back to where we were before we had the policy. A lot of damage has been done, and I think most of it can never be undone.
All right. Well, do you have any last thoughts you want to share with our group? Where can we get your book?
You can get it on Amazon. I know that. That's probably the best place to go because they're giving fairly deep discount on it.
Okay. All right. Well, Greg Prince, I really appreciate you spending so much time here talking on Gospel Tangents.
My pleasure.
Thanks.
I'd like to thank Dr. Greg Prince for spending so much time talking to us about his book, Gay Rights and the Mormon Church. So I'd encourage you to go out and buy it. It's a great read, and I'm sure you'll learn a lot, like I have. In our next conversation, I'm really excited to introduce historian Dan Vogel. The interesting thing in our next conversation is he says that the difference between critics and apologists isn't that large.
I don't think that's necessarily a negative thing if you're an honest critic.
Mm-hmm.
Just the same thing if you're an honest apologist. So there's not really that much, they're not really that far apart.
The critic and the apologist aren't that far apart?
No, we're not really. Not in my mind.
Oh, that's interesting. If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please support Gospel Tangents and become a subscriber. For just $5 a month, go to patreon.com/gospeltangents and you can hear the entire interview. And you can also get transcripts available at either our Amazon website, or if you want to give the money to me and not Amazon, please subscribe on my website at gospeltangents.com and you can click the yellow subscribe button. Of course, we're also on Facebook, Twitter, and all the other places. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents. And don't forget to click here to subscribe on YouTube, here for a transcript, and over here we've got some more of our great videos. Thanks again for listening.